too.
So, what is wealth? Why is it something that we should be worried about from a societal standpoint? These are some of the questions I should have answered before I posted my thesis on wealth inequality in the NRA. The idea of wealth is very complex and cannot simply be stated through a single definition. This is sort of like my philosophy of wealth and what it entails entirely. Merriam Webster defines it as 1. Obsolete wheel welfare. 2. Abundance of valuable material possessions or resources. 3. Abundant supply, profusion. 4a. All property that has money, value, or an exchangeable value, and all material objects that have economic utility, especially the stock of useful goods having economic value in existence at any one time. Investopedia defines it as the value of all assets of worth owned by a person, community, company, or country. Wealth is determined by taking the total market value of all physical and intangible assets owned, then subtracting all debts. Essentially, wealth is the accumulation of resources. Specific people, organizations, and nations are said to be wealthy when they are able to accumulate many valuable resources or goods. In America, the acquisition of wealth goes far beyond just money. This is why I'm not so worried about income inequality overall. Income inequality plays a small role in the acquisition of health. Yes, you must have money in some instances in order to buy the vessels that acquire wealth, but you may inherit them as well. That plays a bigger factor in the acquisition of wealth and the overall problem of wealth inequality in America. From here out, I will use the definition of all material objects that have economic utility or the stock of useful goods having economic value of any one time. I will add to this definition, though, by excluding the word material and replacing it with tangible and intangible objects. A lot of wealth that is generated has no physical existence, like stocks or intellectual property. These things are just ideas. They are not physical goods. What can be used to measure wealth? Measuring wealth is not as easy as adding up the value of everything you own. It's subjective and depends on what things are valuable in society. In the past, coastal tribes have had a system of wealth built upon one collection of seashells. Not everyone values seashells anymore. So, what are some of the things that are measured in determining wealth? Well, physical goods. This is anything that has value in our society, from the goods that a company is holding to be sold to the collection of antique cars in someone's garage. The value of these things vary greatly from individual to individual and presents a problem to evaluating one's individual wealth. The market may set a price for something, but each individual may value it differently. A person may not value a first edition comic book of Spider-Man in mint condition or a fully restored Model T Ford car as much as an ounce of gold. We create the value of these things. They have no inherent base value. Money. Money itself is an abstract concept. It represents a medium of exchange that is valid between parties. In a general sense, one either trades their manual labor or a product in which they produced in order to acquire it. It sets a baseline in which we can create a value-based system between a society in order to evaluate the worth of one's physical labor and/or time. Money itself has no inherent value either. It is given value by a plethora of external means. The value of money decreases over time as well. This is one of the major problems when trying to accumulate wealth in terms of pure money. Inflation eats away its value, and governments can adjust the value of their currencies through intentional or unintentional means. Property. I put this in a separate category than physical goods because I don't think they are necessarily the same when we talk about wealth. By property, I mean actual buildings and pieces of lands. For tax purposes, these are different than physical goods that a person buys once. And stocks, bonds, and trusts. Stocks are a type of security that an individual may purchase and then theoretically own a portion of an entity. Stocks go up and down based upon performance of the stock market and the company. Their price volatility can either depend on actual events that produce real value or on events perceived to create future value or speculation. Bonds are fixed income investments, and trusts are fiduciary agreements that allow a third party or trustee to hold assets on behalf of a beneficiary or beneficiaries. It's a vessel to transfer wealth without having to deal with as much red tape and taxes. Intellectual property and other intangible goods. I put these in a separate category because they're hard to define. Intellectual property protects an idea so that it cannot be stolen and be monetized by another person for a specific period of time. I have my problems with the length of intellectual property rights, but I'll save that for another time. Other intangible goods refers to one's own brand or image or anything else that I cannot specifically think of at the moment. One's brand or image has the ability to accumulate wealth through things such as free gifts to celebrities to help advertise for products. If I've missed anything, then I'll add it later. As of now, I feel like I hit all the aspects that generate this idea of what can be used to measure wealth. From the list above, hopefully one can understand why I focus more on wealth inequality. It encompasses so much that just not one policy idea will be able to address the complexities of it. I believe there are two distinct Americas, one in which the majority of the population lives in a rat race, and the other in which lives upon the ideas of the American dream. There is a plethora of reasons as to why an individual falls into one category or the other. One's mindset, their environment, and access to resources usually determine which America they live in. The book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki and Sharon Lechter describes these two worlds perfectly. One dad is a government employee who lives an earnest life saving his money for retirement and living according to his means. The other dad believes in wealth acquisition and investing. I'm not advocating for the book itself, but the two characters depicted live two totally different Americas based upon their individual philosophies. Acquiring wealth is much more than changing your mindset, though, and isn't as easy as reading a couple of books. So what is the rat race? I describe this as most wage-earning Americans and small business owners. Salary earners also fall into this category. Most of these individuals trade their time and labor for money. They usually live paycheck to paycheck, with very few being able to accumulate a savings substantial enough for emergencies. I put small business owners in this category because many of them still work 40 hours a week. All they did was create their own job. Sure, they have an advantage over wage-earning Americans because they have the ability to earn resources appropriate to the amount of effort they put in, but they don't work any less. When an individual's time and labor is tied to a wage, then their earnings are potentially capped. No matter how well or efficient one worked today, one's wages will not reflect that on a day-to-day basis. One will always get paid the same no matter what. This is where I can agree with libertarians, and I do not logically conclude that we should abolish the minimum wage because of that. This realization doesn't mean you shouldn't strive to always perform the best you can, though. One should develop the personal drive and gain self-gratification from a job well done. That and the potential for promotions and raises still exist. Getting out of the rat race is incredibly hard. Not only do we have an entire industry that uses evidence-based research to compel us to consume, our society also cultivates this idea that we must always strive for more than we actually need to fill a void that we actually don't have. You see, the majority of Americans are under the illusion that they are in different economic class thanks to debt. The majority of Americans do not own assets but large amounts of personal debt. The debt accumulates sometimes from necessity, housing, medical, travel needs, and other times wants, living outside your means or keeping up with the Joneses. According to an article from NerdWallet, the amount of total personal debt in the United States held by citizens is around 25 trillion. This includes debt from student loans, homes, cars, credit cards, and medical emergencies. To put this into perspective, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the real GDP for the first quarter of 2018 is $19.97 trillion. Real GDP is a macroeconomic measure of the value of economic output adjusted for price changes. For example, inflation and deflation. So the total output of the American economy for one quarter doesn't even equate to the total amount of debt owned by all consumers. Debt comes with a price. Very few instances of borrowing come free of any interest payments. Interest is what eats the majority of one's ability to break free from the rat race. Let's take a look at a home mortgage, for example. According to the Census government website, the average cost of a house sold, including land, in March of 2018 is around $360,000. If you borrow this now, the average interest rate is 3.92%, which is still historically low. After you pay this 30-year mortgage off, the total cost of the loan would be $612,768. You could almost buy another house in the amount of interest collected on that loan. Also, the house payment would be about $1,700 a month, and this doesn't include property tax, nor does it include home insurance. The average real median household income is $59,039, according to the Census Bureau, or about $4,900 a month before taxes. It seems to me that the average price of a house sold with the average salary in America is way off. Then that makes you wonder, who is buying all the property then? Buying a house is one thing because it can potentially increase in value and one could make a profit off the investment. However, this isn't true for most of the things bought with debt. As soon as you drive a car off the lot, it loses a substantial amount of its value, and by the time you pay the car off, half its value has already been depreciated. Finding what the average amount of interest a typical American worker pays is fairly difficult. So I made this hypothetical situation with a family that needs 2 cars and 2 kids. So they will have a 3-bedroom house around the average price point of $189,000 to live in a suburb close to a major city.